Ladies and gentlemen, I've been in this job for a year now. When I was given it, I said that to be responsible for the NHS was the biggest privilege of my life, and so it's been. It's been a wonderful year in a remarkable organisation. Right here today in this conference hall, we have the brilliant team from North West Ambulance who are just waiting to ferry me off if I have a seizure in the middle of this speech. Let's give them a big round of applause to thank them for what they're doing. And I've been very lucky to have a great team of ministers. Norman Lamb, Dan Poulter, Anna Soubry, and Freddie Howe have been terrific. Now, I know Norman's a Lib Dem, but he's a great minister. They've all been fantastic. So please, too, give them a round of applause for all their work. I actually had an NHS operation on my head last year. Now, you might say there are lots of things wrong with my head, but this was only minor surgery. I was lying on my back in the operating theatre. The surgeon had his scalpel out, and he was ready to go, when one of the nurses looked at me and said, "By the way, Mr. Hunt, what is it you do for a living?" I froze. In fact, my mind flashed back to when Ronald Reagan was shot and he was wheeled into the operating theatre and he looked up at the Surgeon General and he said, "I hope you're all Republicans." After what happened to Philip Hammond, I'm inclined to say, I hope you're all Conservatives. I go out onto the front line most weeks, not just visiting, but actually rolling up my sleeves, putting on the uniform and mucking in. And I've learnt more from doing that than I've ever found out from sitting behind a ministerial desk. I've done the tea round in a Worthing ward, washed down emergency beds in Watford, answered the phone in a busy London GP surgery, even done a nursing round at Elaine's amazing hospital, the Salford Royal. You'll be relieved to know that no one has yet asked me to do any surgery. And I'm pleased to say the staff are never slow to say when I'm not meeting their high standards. Disconcertingly, the usual response I get is, "You're much nicer than we thought you'd be." But going on the front line, you meet some remarkable people. People like the inspirational Elaine and her team at Salford, running one of the safest hospitals in the country, right here on our doorstep. Or a GP that I met in Feltham, who had a patient who was diagnosed with a terminal illness. He went out of his way to go and visit that patient every day after he'd finished work. Then one day he arrived at that patient's home and was upset to hear that the patient had just died. So he decided to wash and clean the patient as he told the patient's wife, "I want this man to go out of his home with dignity." To him, that was just his job. To me, it's the NHS. There for us and our families, no matter how old, how frail, how hard up, treating everyone with dignity, respect, and compassion. That incredible miracle of human nature that happens when one human being is confronted with another who's unwell. However tired, however stressed, however busy they feel, they tap into hidden reserves of strength and compassion to comfort and help. Now, I don't come from a health background. I set up my own business. I set up a charity in Africa. I've worked in Japan. But I have to say that in all the places I've worked, I have never seen people strive harder than the doctors and nurses and professionals on our NHS front line. And to all of you who work in our NHS, I want to say thank you for what you do for our NHS and our country. You make us proud. But if you love an institution, you're even more determined to sort out any problems. Which is why every week I make sure that I see personally some of the letters that come in about things that have gone wrong. Recently, I read about someone who lost their wife because her records were mixed up and she was given the wrong medicine. Someone else wrote in who lost their 3-year-old son because the ambulance didn't get there in time. Someone else had been brushed off when he complained that his father was left lying naked in a public ward. Now, these are far from typical of our NHS and its amazing staff. And things do go wrong, sometimes despite everyone's best efforts. But the duty of a health secretary, however painful, is to look into these problems, accept responsibility, and do what it takes to stop them being repeated. And that's what happened this year. Not just at Mid Staffs Hospital, where so many terrible things happened, but at 11 more hospitals, we had to put into special measures, all in one go, something that's never happened before in the NHS. So this year, we appointed for the first time a chief inspector of hospitals, modelled on the tough regulatory regime that Ofsted use for our schools. This is someone whose job it is to speak out without fear or favour about standards in our hospitals, the nation's whistleblower in chief. And what Professor Sir Mike Richards finds won't always be comfortable, but his tough new inspections, which started 2 weeks ago, will mean everyone, for the first time, will know the answers to some simple questions. How good is my local hospital? Is it safe? Does it have enough staff? Does it put patients first? And I'm sure that in most places, the answer will be positive. But if it isn't, we need to know, and things will change. It sounds simple. But many of these problems should never have happened in the first place. Let's be clear. In a huge system like the NHS, things do go wrong and mistakes are made whichever party is in power. But tragically, under Labour, the system did everything it could to cover up those mistakes, giving Morecambe Bay the all clear in April 2010, despite the deaths of 16 babies. That was wrong. Giving the all clear to Basildon and Tameside hospitals in late 2009, just weeks before stories emerged of blood-spattered wards, patients being treated on trolleys, and elderly patients left alone, unable to eat. That was wrong. Refusing 81 requests, as their ministers did, for a public inquiry into Mid Staffs. That was wrong. Forcing a group of grieving families to wait in the snow, wind, and rain because the health secretary refused to grant them even one meeting. That too was wrong. As the country's leading expert on hospital death rates, Professor Sir Brian Jarman says, the Department of Health was a denial machine. Indeed, the chair of the CQC talked of the pressure she was put under by a minister in that government not to speak out. Now, that person, Barbara Young, is no Conservative. In fact, she's a Labour peer. So even their own people felt desperately uncomfortable. And to those Labour people who hated what was happening on their watch, I have this to say: you were right. Covering things up is not only worse for those who suffer, it means the problem doesn't get fixed and maybe repeated. And then it's not the rich who suffer, it's the most vulnerable, disabled children, older people with dementia, those with no relatives to kick up a fuss, ordinary people who put their faith in the system only to find the system wasn't there for them when they needed it. Labour betrayed the very people they claim to stand up for. But what's even more worrying is that they are still in complete denial about what happened. In his speech last week, Andy Burnham didn't find the time to mention Mid Staffs once. Not once. In the year of the Francis inquiry, Morecambe Bay, the Keogh report, a brand new inspection regime, none of that was important enough to merit even a single mention by Labour's health spokesman. But he did mention privatisation, 13 times. You see, they want the whole health debate to be about so-called privatization. But use of the independent sector to bring down waiting times and raise standards is not privatization. It's what Tony Blair, Alan Milburn, Patricia Hewitt, John Reed, and Alan Johnson all believed was right for patients. Ed Miliband now says that was wrong. But no ideology, left or right, should ever trump the needs of patients. Because for patients, it's not public versus private, it's good care versus bad care. And we'll stamp out bad care wherever we find it. Public sector, private sector, hospitals, care homes, surgeries, and never cover it up. So today, I can announce a major reform that will stop Labour or any government ever trying to cover up poor care. We'll legislate in the Care Bill to give the CQC statutory independence, rather like the Bank of England has over interest rates, so ministers can never again lean on it to suppress bad news. The care of our NHS patients is too important for political meddling, and our new legislation will make sure that ministers always put patients first. Now, as Conservatives, we show our commitment to the NHS by what we do as well as what we say. And we have a record to be proud of. We set up the Cancer Drugs Fund, which has helped 34,000 people so far. Now, this week, David Cameron announced that it will continue for another 2 years. Even better would be if Labour in Wales agreed to introduce it, so that we stop the obscenity of Welsh cancer sufferers renting houses in England in order to get the cancer drugs they need to save their lives. And unlike in Wales, the government here made the difficult choice to protect the NHS budget in the face of unprecedented financial pressure. And look what we've done with that budget. On basically the same budget in real terms, the NHS is doing 800,000 more operations every year than Labour's last year in office, and long waits for operations have actually come down. In 2010, 18,000 people waited more than a year for their operation. Now, it's less than 400. And not just that, 4 million more outpatient appointments every single year. MRSA rates halved, mixed-sex wards virtually gone, 8,000 fewer managers, 4,000 more doctors, all thanks to our Prime Minister, David Cameron, whose personal commitment to the NHS has shone like a beacon from the moment he became our party leader. But if we are to prepare the NHS for the future, we cannot stop there. Andrew Lansley courageously put health budgets and decisions on treatment back into the hands of local doctors, and we're seeing huge innovation as a result. And if there's one big change we need more than anything, it's to transform the care older people receive outside hospital. It's true for all of us, but especially true for older people, that prevention is better than cure. Avoiding that fall down the stairs, stopping an infection going septic, halting the onset of dementia. These are the things that give people happy, healthy last years to spend at home surrounded by family and friends. They also save the NHS money. And to do this, we need to rediscover the ideal of family doctors. Making GPs more accessible for people at work, as today's announcement about piloting 8 till 8, 7-day opening will do. But also giving GPs the time and space to care proactively for vulnerable older people, the people on their list who are most ill, so they can keep tabs on them, and help them stay well for longer. The last government's GP contract changes in 2004 abolished named GPs, and in doing so destroyed the personal link between patients and their GPs. Trust between doctor and patient is at the heart of what NHS professionalism stands for, and we should never have allowed that GP contract to undermine it. So from next April, we'll be reversing that mistake by introducing a named GP responsible for proactive care for all vulnerable older people. Someone to be their champion in the integrated health and social care system that we'll be implementing from April, following George Osborne's announcement in July. Restoring the link between doctor and patient for millions and joining up a system that's allowed too many people to fall between the cracks. And for those who need residential care, we'll do something else. We'll stop them ever having to sell their home, the home they've worked hard for all their lives, to pay for the cost of care. Our DILNOT reforms will make us one of the first countries in the world where people make proper provision for their care costs, just as they do for their pension. Now, these are big and difficult challenges. But the party that really cares about the NHS is the party prepared to take tough decisions so the NHS can be the pride of our children and grandchildren, just as it's our pride too. No to the blind pursuit of targets, but yes to putting patients first. No to cover-ups and ignoring problems, but yes to transparency and sorting them out. No to pessimism about the future of the NHS. Yes to pride and confidence that with courage and commitment, it can go from strength to strength. That's our Conservative NHS, the doctors' party, the nurses' party, and yes, the patients' party. Conference, we've always been the party of aspiration. It's always been our dream to make Britain the best country in the world for young people to grow up in. But we're also the party that believes in respect for older people. So as we face the challenge of an aging population, under our stewardship of the NHS, we can do something else too. We can make Britain not just the best country in the world to grow up in, but the best country in the world to grow old in too. Let's stop at nothing to make that happen. Thank you.